Vile and vicious. Attorney General takes on senior lawyers, including former attorney generals and legal practitioners, accusing them of systematic and deliberate running down of the judiciary to achieve selfish ends.
I observe a systematic and conscious effort by some lawyers to denigrate the judiciary and undermine public confidence in the sound administration of justice through a deliberate misrepresentation of the effect of court rulings, as well as false and vitriolic commentary on electronic and mass media, purely inspired by a vile motive to run down the judiciary.
We tell you why the Attorney General is questioning why many lawyers fail to pay tax despite their luxurious lifestyles.
The luxurious lifestyles of certain lawyers, riding in the most flash of vehicles and acquiring top-end properties, are hardly commensurate with the amount of taxes they pay.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Gas and Cement, the nation builder. It's also brought to you by Vodafone. Together we can. Vile and vicious. Strong words tonight from the Attorney General, Godfred Dame, as he takes on his colleague lawyers, including senior legal practitioners and those he brands as former leaders of the bar, accusing them of running a systematic and deliberate campaign to twist facts and create disaffection for the judiciary. Now, Godfred Dame has been speaking at the annual bar conference in Bogatanga, where he went all out to question the ethics of some of his colleagues.
I observe a systematic and conscious effort by some lawyers to denigrate the judiciary and undermine public confidence in the sound administration of justice through a deliberate misrepresentation of the effect of court rulings, as well as false and vitriolic commentary on electronic and mass media, purely inspired by a vile motive to run down the judiciary. Even when applications duly filed in accordance with law and procedure are pending before the highest court of the land, some legal practitioners do not spare an effort to prejudice the minds of the public with mischievous analysis on public radio, television, and social media, all calculated to force the hands of the judges to deliver the verdict in a particular manner, or to whip up sentiment of the public against a particular court hearing the matter, in the event of an outcome unfavorable to them. These practices are vicious and misguided, and indeed it holds true that the arena for the lawyer to test the strength of his reasoning or the validity of his argument is in the courtroom, not on the airwaves or modern-day social media. I need not remind this gathering that the responsibility for a fair and effective administration of the laws of the Republic of Ghana are a product of the conscious and the collective efforts of all. The nature of our laws, enacted by Parliament, the procedure and judgment of our courts, the work of law enforcement officials, the wisdom, skill, and zeal of the bar are all critical. Throughout the history of Ghana, the judiciary has served us well in its capacity to develop fundamental principles and give life to the aspirations of the citizen. It is no time to destroy same beyond redemption, or to, if I may borrow the words of Lord Tosin at this stage, and he says, to give it a funeral oration.
Well, he had a specific example of a recent judgment death case to point to in making his case. He says he himself was a victim of this systematic attack.
I recall that recently, the state was castigated widely in the press for incurring a judgment debt in excess of $50 million as a result of the activities of the ESWA Interministerial Committee on Illegal Mining about 2 years ago. In July this year, I successfully led the prosecution of an application to set aside the said judgment. Some lawyers who are active players in social media, perhaps feeling disappointed that the weapon deployed by them in their attack on the state's measures to resuscitate the war against illegal mining in Galamsey had been destroyed, mounted unwarranted attacks on me and the judge who delivered the ruling, with some suggesting rather preposterously and absurdly that the judge in question should be removed from office. Indeed, very ridiculous and preposterous to say the least. It is as if they revel in judgment or rulings against the state. And when judgments are successfully challenged, it is disappointment galore for them. May I take the opportunity to convey to the bar, of which I am its humble official leader, that insofar as a attorney general, the state will zealously protect its interests in litigation, just as private legal practitioners protect the interests of their clients.
Well, he then narrows down to identify a particular group of lawyers he was talking about, including former leaders of the bar, that is, former attorney generals, those who have previously occupied his current position.
And I cannot conclude this address without once again denouncing the tendency of some lawyers, some being senior lawyers, who have occupied high offices of state and have even been leaders of the bar, to deploy the traditional and social media to assail the integrity and reputation of senior figures in this country. Such conduct, undoubtedly dishonorable, also occasions a breach of rules of professional conduct and etiquette at the bar. I would advise lawyers, when using social media, to be mindful of the age-old requirements of the profession insofar as ethics is concerned. Technology did not eradicate ethics, neither did it render the need for ethical compliance any less important or necessary. The spread of false information by lawyers and disregard for the cherished values of the legal profession, apart from being disreputable, poses a far greater threat to cohesion in society, especially when it comes from senior lawyers. The misguided crave for cheap publicity and undue disparagement of others must be avoided. The nation ought to be concerned because ultimately a dishonest bar breeds a corrupt bench and affects the quality of society we seek to build.
And joining me on the telephone line right now is the former president of the Greater Accra Bar Association, Mr. Frank Davis. Mr. Davis, thank you for time here on Top Story.
Thank you.
Also joining me is a member of the NDC legal team, Mr. Abraham Amaliba. Mr. Amaliba, I'm grateful that you could join us.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Amaliba, do you identify with the concerns the Attorney General just expressed there?
I disagree with him vehemently. The reason being that he, as an Attorney General, should know that he's a public official. And he's just like the Minister of Health, who can be criticized. He's just like the Minister of Education, who can be criticized on free education. So if his conduct comes into the public purview and he's being criticized, I think he should have a big stomach to accommodate those criticisms. Nobody is criticizing him to destroy him. But if there are some inconsistencies in the conduct his cases, and people point that out, that does not amount to destroying him or destroying the bench or the bar. It is just that his conduct as a public official, just like any public official, just like even the president, can be scrutinized, and that is what is happening.
But he's not only talking about himself, right? He's talking about a systematic, deliberate, almost sort of a campaign that targets the judiciary as a whole, that twisting of facts to create disaffection for the bench. That is a bigger problem, is it not?
I do not think so. What I think is happening is that lawyers who speak to the media engage in that exercise to educate the people and the populace. Lawyers who speak to the media do that to demystify the law and make it easy for the populace to understand happenings in court. I do not think that, particularly when a case is done with, and then you criticize the judgment, that amounts to denigrating the court. I think the court has a much bigger stomach to accommodate all this. It is when you begin to personally attack judges, like in Japan did in the case of one judge, that for me is unacceptable. But critiquing the decisions and rulings of courts, I have never heard anywhere that amounts to poisoning the minds of people against the judge.
Mr. Frank Davis, I mean, lawyers are not exempt from enjoying that right to free speech. They can certainly criticize a judgment, criticize a judge, criticize the Attorney General. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
Good evening once again, and to your cherished listeners and viewers. I think that what the Attorney General said is being taken out of context. Listening to him, Attorney General is not saying that lawyers cannot critique judgments, or for that matter, lawyers cannot critique something he does. If you listen to him carefully, he was talking about lawyers running commentaries on cases which are pending in court. That is the crux of the matter. And I would have expected that my good friend Amaliba would have addressed that issue. It's not about critiquing a judgment. Lawyers go out of their way to pontificate on cases which are pending before court. And most often than not, the lawyers who are involved in that practice, hardly, about 99% of them, have not even seen a courtroom before. They have not even advocated before any court of law. Indeed, I agree with the Attorney General that the best avenue for a lawyer to display his legal knowledge is a courtroom. It is not sitting on radio and giving analysis about cases which are pending in court. That is unethical, and it borders on professional misconduct. When I hear my colleague lawyers, fellow lawyers, run down judges and decisions of the court in the manner that most of them do now, I ask myself whether these lawyers will go back to the same courtroom. It's a bit unfortunate and very, very disappointing for the profession. I mean, these days, everybody has turned himself into a legal luminary. And of course, Evans. Sometimes, with all due respect, Evans, I'm a very good friend. But I blame some of you too. You call lawyers who are hardly 2 years at the bar, and they are referred to as legal luminaries, eminent lawyer. Why wouldn't they come on radio and talk the way they talk? I agree with the Attorney General that we should take a high hand insofar as running commentaries of cases pending in court by lawyers is concerned.
Where the high hand,
it does no good to our profession.
Where the high hand
it does no good to our profession.
Where the high hand means what exactly?
Hello?
Well, I'm wondering where that high hand means what exactly.
We have our professional ethics. The Legal Profession Act guides us all as to what to do. And most often than not, when these lawyers involve themselves in that conduct and the court cite them for contempt, then the whole public is in uproar. When the lawyers who perpetrate those acts, when they fall foul and they are cited for contempt, the lawyers are not being given the opportunity. But you see, when a case is pending in court, on the case, I think that is contemptuous. It is contempt. Because you can't decide for the judge what the judge should do. Indeed, if after the judgment you want to critique, that's a different matter. And I do not find anything wrong with lawyers critiquing a judgment. But where you are making personalizations of cases which are pending before court, I mean, that is not the law we practice.
I mean, we got a hint of who exactly he may be talking about. In fact, he actually said it, that for senior lawyers, some of them who have occupied, and using his own words, the state office, and then he goes on to say some of them being former leaders of the bar, and we all know leaders of the bar will definitely be attorney generals. He's very specific there in singling out his predecessors for this. Is that even fair to suggest that for his predecessors have been engaged in this? I think we may have lost both of them on the telephone line right now. We're going to get both of them back on this pretty significant subject that the Attorney General himself had raised today at the bar conference, which is generating a fair bit of controversy. But whilst we try and get them back on the telephone line, I have some breaking news for you.
Joy 99.7 FM, your most reliable news source.
And yes, we have some breaking news for you, and this has been one of those big stories over the last 1 week that it's almost come full circle now. I have in the studio with me right now, Evans Mensah. And Hans, what just happened?
Well, in the last 7 minutes, the Ghana Football Association has posted on its website that it has parted ways with Black Stars head coach C.K. Akono and his assistant. And the statement on the FA's website says the Executive Council of the Ghana Football Association has taken a decision to terminate the appointment of Black Stars coach Charles Akono and his 2 assistants with immediate effect. This follows the receipt of the technical report from the head coach of the senior national team and the report from the Black Stars Management Committee following Ghana's Group G World Cup qualifying matches against Ethiopia and South Africa. He goes on to say the Executive Council, after considering the 2 reports, have decided to terminate its relationship with the head coach C.K. Akono and the 2 assistants. The Executive Council has formed a 3-member committee made up of Vice President Mark Addo, Upper East Regional Football Association Chairman Alhaji Salifu Zida, and Dr. Randiabi to find a head coach and assistant coaches for the Black Stars within the next 72 hours. And it ended by saying that the association wishes C.K. Akono and his assistants the very best in their future endeavors.
So if you're just joining us, breaking news coming out of the Ghana Football Association is that C.K. Akono, the coach of the Black Stars, has just been sacked. He's been fired. And the statement is clear why he's been fired. It narrows it down to his recent game.
Yes, the 2 games against Ethiopia and South Africa, and it's upon receipt of the coach's technical report and the report of the Black Stars Management Committee. It is based on those 2 reports that the Executive Council has made the decision to terminate the appointment of C.K. Akono.
I find something also in that statement pretty intriguing. The committee has been set up to look for a new coach. They have 72 hours.
72 hours for a 3-member committee made up of the Vice President of the FA, Mark Addo, Upper East Regional Football Association Chairman Alhaji Salifu Zida, and Dr. Randiabi to find a head coach and assistant coaches, not just a head coach, to find a head coach and assistant coaches for the Black Stars within the next 72 hours. So
that window is pretty small.
Absolutely.
For that.
And it doesn't sound like they are looking at a stopgap coach before,
like a permanent coach.
Exactly. So it appears that they are going to straight away look for a permanent
I guess
coach.
the question to ask is 72 hours enough to find, interview, satisfy yourself that this is the coach to take Ghana the long run? That's a question I'm asking.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is a bit too short from what we know of the procedures in appointing the head coach of the Black Stars. But maybe, just maybe, they've got some candidates already penciled down. Maybe they've already begun speaking to some people. Maybe they have some CVs that they've made calls to those, coaches or candidates. And maybe they've probably shortlisted certain candidates, and so maybe they already have a head start before the statement.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have more of this definitely on Newsnight in 10 minutes.
This is the Joy FM breaking news story.
And I have back on the telephone line Mr. Frank Davis. He's a former Greater Accra president of the Ghana Bar Association. Also with me is Abraham Maliba. Just on the back of this very brief football breaking news that we had, I must indicate that Frank Davis is a football man true and true. And so I guess it's just it would be out of place to ask him very briefly, does it surprise you that C.K. Akono has been sacked?
I am not too surprised, but I don't think that enough reasoning has been given for his sack. I mean, like you rightly said, I have done football to some level, and I watched those 2 games, and I didn't think that CK was at his best. But the questions we need to ask is whether he's been given the opportunity to actually do what he knows to do best. Most often than not, I mean, when things happen, we decide on matters just as they seem to be. But I mean, hey, his employers have decided to terminate his appointment. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line.
I think that from the 2 games that I saw, I didn't think that enough had gone into preparing the players. I mean, it seemed as if they didn't know what they were doing on the field.
Indeed, this is something that just is breaking the last 7 minutes, and so there'll be more to learn on. Let's return to our main conversation. Just before I lost you on the line, Mr. Davis, I was asking you, in his speech today, the Attorney General not almost. He actually identified those he was targeting with this address. He says former leaders of the bar. That could only be his predecessors he's referring to. Is that even fair to suggest that former attorney generals who've occupied that position, is currently occupying, have been on a systematic, deliberate campaign to discredit the bench, the judiciary? Is that even fair?
Well, I mean, we've all been listening to the kinds of things which some of our colleagues say on radio. I mean, very senior lawyers, and I must say, I mean, former deputy attorney generals, former attorney generals. I mean, I will only plead. I will only plead that no matter what happens in court, Evans, we are lawyers. I mean, we are lawyers. If you lose a case in the High Court, then you go to the Court of Appeal. If you lose in the Court of Appeal, you go to the Supreme Court. Even in the Supreme Court, after judgment is handed, you can go for a review. So when decisions are handed in court and you hear lawyers comment, I mean, the kinds of things that lawyers say. I mean, in one breath, the same court gives the ruling, and then the lawyers go outside and hail the court that this is the best court ever. That same court gives a decision against you, and that court is back. I mean, the reasoning is so. I mean, it's so. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, but the reason, I mean, is so strange. The same court hands a decision which is fair. The same court hands a decision which does not go in your favor, and the court is not good. The commentary which is run, I mean, the administration of justice, as if it's come to a standstill with just one case. And I am pleading with my colleague lawyers. I mean, this is not the training we had. It's getting completely out of hand. Anybody gets up, any lawyer, 2, 3, 4 years at the bar, run commentaries, run down judges, run down colleague lawyers. It is just not fair. It's just not fair.
Mr. Maliba, again, same question to you. When the Attorney General identifies former leaders of the bar as those he may be referring to as running a deliberate campaign to, what's your impression of that? What's your take on that identification?
I think there's an attempt to categorize some lawyers belonging to a certain political party, and that is to say the NDC, as those who the Attorney General is referring to. But I was just wondering whether that reference to the former leaders of the bar would also include Frank Davis, who is commenting now, and who also came up in the Supreme Court, where the judges were also up in arms against him. Will that reference of former bar leaders include him? I think that what is happening is not just because people are commenting or lawyers are commenting. It is because some people don't feel confident in what they are doing. And so when lawyers critique them, then they begin to wobble. If care is not taken, there's going to be a lacuna, a gap, where moving forward, lawyers will not speak, will not comment on legal matters, on happenings in courts, and that vacuum must necessarily be filled. Now you have quacks, you have non-professionals filling that gap. What would you have done to the legal profession? I can understand where you are a lawyer and work on record, and then running commentary. You are conducting your case in court, and at the same time on radio. That I can understand. But to have a blanket ban on lawyers not to comment, because when they comment, there's one person called an attorney general who is uncomfortable, then I think that we are running a risk of creating a lacuna, which necessarily will be filled. And I don't want us to get to that point.
I mean, Mr. Davis, Mr. Maliba has a point, right? I mean, you make a point about lawyers 2-3 years out.
Hello?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, Evans.
Yes. Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Davis?
Yes, Evans. Can you raise up your voice a bit?
Yes, I mean, I'll just ask you. I mean, Mr. Malema makes the point. You made the point about lawyers 2-3 years after the bar on radio being described as legal luminary. I must indicate we don't do that here. We just call them lawyers, and we try to always get the best quality with a lot of years in under their belt. But isn't that aspect of this whole public engagement also necessary? Because a lot of things happen in court, legal terminologies. You need people to bring the public along and help us understand the processes in court. That is an essential part of this engagement in the court of public opinion.
Evans, I said from the beginning, and I'll reiterate, the Attorney General in no way, he didn't say that lawyers should not comment. I think it's been taken completely out of context. I've listened to him more than 3 times. I'm doing virtual conference because I'm not in Bogatanga. I listened to his speech from the beginning to the end. He's not saying that lawyers should not critique judgments. He is definitely talking about lawyers who have made it a habit to round down judges and comment on cases which are pending in court. In the process, denigrate the justice system. That is exactly what he's talking about.
Mr.
My good friend Amaliba, he has been running commentaries on cases. That is when the cases are done. Nobody has held him to be at fault with the law. No. I mean, we all critique judgments, but it is the manner of critique which is important. Yeah. As a lawyer, you should know the kind of language to use when you are communicating.
Mr. Maliba wonders when the Attorney General talks about former leaders of the bar, whether you are one of those guilty ones.
He knows the answer. He and Maliba knows the answer. I cannot be one of them. Certainly not. Because my training does not give me the opportunity to do that. I've been trained well as a lawyer, and I train under the best.
Mr. Davis, I'm grateful that you joined us with your thoughts. Also, Mr. Abraham Amaliba, also a lawyer. I'm grateful, gentlemen. But you want to stay with us because there's more to come from the bar conference where there's a lot of talk about lawyers helping people evade tax and they themselves not paying their taxes despite their luxurious lifestyles, driving the posh cars, living in the most, expensive of homes, and not paying taxes.
The luxurious lifestyles of certain lawyers, riding in the most flash of vehicles and acquiring top-end properties, are hardly commensurate with the amount of taxes they pay.
And then we have the very latest on this breaking news story this hour for you. The sacking of the Black Stars coach, CK Akono. He's gone, terminated. And the new team, they have 72 hours to find a new coach for the Black Stars. All on that on Newsnight.
Masa, yet 2 unlimited calls. Vodafone